Welcome back to Whispers at Night. Tonight, 8 new, most disturbing true small-town horror stories. Porch lights, empty roads, doors that never should have opened. Before we start, like and subscribe. And drop a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching so YouTube keeps showing you stories like this. Street quiet. Neighbors watching. Ready? Let's begin. I never thought I'd inherit anything from Great Aunt Edie. We met once, briefly, at a cluttered family cookout when I was 13. After that, a birthday card now and then with a $2 bill tucked inside. A Christmas postcard with a snow-covered barn. Her careful cursive and nothing more. She lived by herself somewhere on the high plains. My mother always said Edie Lane had 2 companions, her stubbornness and the wind. So when a lawyer from Willow Bend, Wyoming called and said my name was on a deed, the bottom dropped out of my ordinary life. A house, 20 acres outside town, a savings account with enough to be respectable. I was 32, a project coordinator in Denver whose days were mostly email replies and slide decks. I took a month off, put a plant on my desk in the care of a coworker, and drove north. The land opened up after Cheyenne. Grass like short hair bristling in the breeze. Shelter belts of cottonwood marking creek lines. Light that made everything honest. Willow Bend looked exactly like its postcards. Wide main street, brick storefronts with painted signs. A feed mill shouldering the sky. A cafe that promised pie by the slice. A church with a fresh white steeple. Edie's place sat 2 miles past the last mailbox. A narrow 2-story with a corrugated roof and a windmill that still clicked on slow turns. The lawyer, Simon Lake, met me at the porch with a manila envelope, a ring of keys and a face that held both kindness and habit. He said Edie died in her sleep in late September, 90 years old, sharp until the end. The sort of neighbor who baked extra for funerals and never missed a ballot. He told me she'd been involved for decades with a group in town called the Hearthline Mission. Food pantry, coat drives, rides to medical appointments, fill the gap work, he called it. If you need anything, he added. Pastor Rook already said to stop by. We stood in the sunlight, awkward in the way strangers are when a third person, the absent one, fills the space between them. Inside, Edie had kept everything. Butter tubs with nails, flour sacks sewn into pillowcases, notebooks stacked in tidy towers, a cedar chest layered in quilts stitched down to gauze. I started in the kitchen and worked my way through the rooms with a notepad and trash bags. Every few hours I'd find some little history, Polaroids from a harvest supper, minutes from a committee meeting, a flyer for a winter clothing drive. The Hearthline name showed up again and again. Edie poured herself into it. They found me on my 3rd day. A knock on the screen door, then a man with silver hair and careful eyes holding a casserole like an introduction. He was Pastor Graham Rook. He said my aunt had been the backbone nobody saw, the person who filled the coffee urn before anyone arrived and stacked chairs after everyone left. He invited me to Wednesday supper at the old Lutheran basement they'd purchased when the congregation moved across town. We do more talking than preaching, he said with a soft smile. Your family. Come if you can, I went. It beat listening to the house shift and breathe in the dark. The basement was bright and clean, the kind of place where the sound of chairs on tile rang like bells. About 60 people gathered, kids swinging sneakered feet under tables, retirees with jackets folded over chair backs, a few faces that told me the nights were sometimes long. We ate stew and cornbread, and a sheet cake decorated with canned cherries. Pastor Rook said a short blessing and talked about the week's deliveries, the new freezer, a grant application. He asked for volunteers. I wrote my name on a sign-up sheet and circled thrift store and Saturday deliveries, because that's what Edie would have circled. The thrift shop lived in a former parts store. Big windows, rolling racks, a register that chirped when a sale went through. The manager, Dottie Case, had a fast laugh and a way of leaning in when people spoke that made them feel briefly steadier. Locals came in for sturdy coats and pots with unbent handles. Road trippers came for vintage and paid what the tag said without blinking. Dottie could tell who needed the backroom discount and who could pay full price for a denim jacket because it looked like a memory. It took me a week to see the odd parts. Dottie would guide certain customers toward the swinging door, and let it hush behind them. 10 minutes later, they'd slip out the alley exit with a taped-up bag. None of it rang through the register. When I asked about the back room, Dottie said we were drowning in donations and winked. "You ought to see prom season." I wanted to believe her. The front room hummed with the kind of good that's easy to recognize. On Saturday, I rode along with deliveries. My driver was a quiet man named Ray Navarro, who knew, without looking at a list, who liked their milk 2%, and which dog might nose a box open if you weren't quick. We zigzagged across the county, trailers tucked into gulches, clapboard houses with porches gone soft, a few small ranches holding on. Ray carried the boxes to the door and stayed longer than a drop-off should take. He'd come back with an envelope on the dash or a brown paper sack tucked under the seat. When I asked, he said, "Folks like to talk. Sometimes they slip you gas money. You don't say no when the price of diesel is what it is." He wasn't wrong, but it didn't feel like only that. I kept working the house in the afternoons. In the back bedroom closet under a folded tarp, I found a shoebox with my name on masking tape. Inside, a small spiral notebook and a handful of bank statements. The withdrawals to Hearthline were larger than gas money. Edie's notes were neat and spare. She wrote about special stops, about Dottie's alley door, about pills counted wrong on purpose. She wrote names and dates in a column no one else had seen. At the bottom of one page, "If anything happens to me, check the crawl space under the west eave." I lay on a drop cloth and slid my shoulders through dust and spider web, moving toward the corner where sunlight penciled through a cracked vent. I tapped the joists until one sounded hollow. A hinge gave. A narrow tin slid free. Pie crust pan hammered flat and folded into a lid. Inside was a manila envelope with photographs, photocopies, and more of Edie's narrow handwriting. I read until the light on the porch turned the color of nickel. The pattern was there once you knew how to read it. Groceries went in. A sealed packet came back. The thrift's back room shifted goods that didn't have tags. People who asked questions, usually older, often alone, started making mistakes with medication or missing appointments, and the next month there was a casserole in the church kitchen. Edie had kept obituaries, coroner notations, and short lines in the margin. Told me something's off. Sheriff said no cause. She had copies of updated wills naming a benevolence fund as a beneficiary. She had a note about Rayen and envelopes on dash. I slept badly. The next morning, a dark SUV idled a long time on the county road, windows reflecting nothing. Midday, my phone rang from unknown. A man's voice, pleasant as a customer service call, said, "If you need help sorting the estate, the mission can recommend a trustworthy buyer. The market's soft for out-of-state sellers." I hung up and locked the doors. I packed the worst of it, the ledger pages with names and the dates next to. Overdose ruled natural. The photos of taped bags, loaded beside donated furniture. Copies of the bank drafts, from Edie, from others, and drove south. At the state complex in Cheyenne, I sat on a plastic chair and told a receptionist I had documents that needed to be in a prosecutor's hands. She stared at the envelope, then at my face, and picked up a phone. The interview room had nothing on the walls. An investigator named Ortiz and an attorney named Willis asked me to start at the beginning. I told them about the casserole, the church basement, the thrift's alley door, Ray's envelopes, Dottie's back room. I slid the ledger across the table and said, "My aunt didn't write fiction. They photocopied everything and asked me to stay in town." That night, a woman from Victim Services walked with me to a motel room with a door that opened to the lobby and said, "Sleep if you can." Things moved quickly after that, and not at all, depending on the hour. Subpoenas, a search warrant for the back of the thrift. Phone records pulled, bank records matched, Ray's route sheets compared to dates on obituaries. 2 weeks later, deputies walked Pastor Rook out of the church with his hands behind him, their faces doing that flat thing officers' faces do when they don't want to be readable. 11 others followed, volunteers who did special pickups, a retired nurse who helped organize pill blister packs, a deputy who always arrived first at wellness checks, the thrift manager, whose laugh did not show up in her paperwork. The county sheriff, Tina Mercado, was booked the same afternoon for obstruction and worse. The state had texts. The state had deposits that didn't match salaries. The state had Edie's careful lines. now linked to evidence nobody could ignore. The story ran everywhere for a week, then in smaller print for a long time. Reporters used words like ring and scheme and enterprise. The prosecutor did not say those words in court. She said names. She said dates. She said pattern of death in vulnerable populations. She said financial exploitation. She called me. She called a man with a cane who lost his wife, and then their savings. She called a grocery clerk who bagged extra cans that weren't food. She called a pharmacist who had been told to mind her lane after asking why a particular patient always ran short. I told the truth with my hands folded to stop their shaking. I described Edie's shoebox, her notes written in letters the size of dimes. I said my aunt believed in helping people, which is how she saw exactly who was using that belief for cover. I sold the house the following spring. The land went to a neighbor who kept actual cattle and had a son who ran fence in weather. That would make most folks cry. I sent the proceeds to a senior legal aid group in a county 2 hours away, because forgiveness and prudence can live in the same body. Simon Lake mailed me a single page and a check with numbers that felt like surrender. I gave the quilts to my mother, who folded them in tissue as if they still held Edie's warmth. Willow Bend kept its shape. The cafe still sold pie. The feed mill still shouldered the sky. The old Lutheran basement stayed dark a long time. Then a new nonprofit moved in, one with posted budgets and a board you could name, with a policy on conflict of interest taped to the office door. Maybe it will be what it says. Maybe the next kind voice will learn what lines not to cross. I hope so. You can't live without hope and stay human. I kept one thing from Edie's notebooks, a small list she wrote near the end. It's just a column of reminders in a hand that steadied a community for years. Keep receipts. Say names out loud. Never let charity mean secret. When the nights are quiet and I hear the wind turn the old windmill in my head, I read that page and picture Edie setting a coffee mug on a church basement table, counting the cups twice so nobody gets missed. I tell her out loud, I saw it through. Then I turn the light off and sleep, because the work is different now and because she'd insist on rest. I'd been on the local beat a long time. Zoning hearings, school budgets, the odd corruption flap that fizzled under sunshine. So when my editor slid a folder across his desk and said, "Go write me something warm," I didn't argue. A hill town in northern New England had landed a big preservation grant. The plan was to fix up a row of 19th century storefronts and put fresh paint on a covered bridge. Easy copy, a pleasant photo. Back in time for Friday's layout. The place was called Brackenridge. Maples along the 2-lane burned like embers the morning I drove in. White clapboards. A church spire that caught the light and threw it back. The kind of general store where the floorboards complained in a friendly way, and a bell on the door announced you whether you wanted announcing or not. If you looked only with your eyes, you'd think you'd stumbled into a postcard. The Brackenridge Heritage Guild kept the town tidy in all the visible ways. Hand-lettered signs, neat brick sidewalks, shutters painted within an approved palette that everybody somehow knew by heart. The guild's chair, Mabel Crow, waited for me on the museum steps with a cardigan over her shoulders, and a smile like hospitality itself. She gave me the tour. War relics, antique tools, a case of sepia portraits with names etched below in cursive so careful it almost hurt to read. "We've always looked after our own," she said, touching the glass like it was skin. "It's what kept us from turning into a highway exit." For 2 days I walked and listened and scribbled in a notebook. I took pictures of federal-style doorways and kids sharing cinnamon twists on a bench. I interviewed a carpenter who specialized in old windows, a gallery owner who said the light here made paint honest, a cafeteria manager who remembered when the post office still had wooden boxes you opened with a tiny brass key. Everyone had a variation on the same line. The guild saved us. The seams started to show when I asked about people who'd left. Faces stiffened a fraction. Names came slowly, if at all. They moved south, someone would say, or he needed a change, or they wanted a different pace. No forwarding addresses, no phone numbers, no stories to match the years they'd supposedly spent side by side. I went to the town office. The vault held deed books bound like Bibles, and neat ledgers that smelled faintly of damp. The clerk was helpful until I began asking about specific dates in the 1990s, one stretch in the late 80s. "We lost some records," she said tightly. "Moisture. A basement problem. It happens. I spoke to a cop because you always do in a small place." Officer Ethan Hale had come back to Brackenridge after a stint with the National Guard. He had a way of staring at the far corner of the room while he talked, like the paint there might provide an alibi if he needed one. "The guild's done good," he said. "That's true." He lowered his voice. "They also have a habit of getting their way." "How so?" "Permits," he said. "Inspections. If you don't follow the advice, and it's always advice, things get sticky. Water tests come back weird. You get a letter about your porch being out of historical compliance. Your property tax reappraisal arrives early and not in your favor. Anyone push back? A young family on Alder Street tried to open a small cafe in their front room, he said. Scones and coffee. Lasted 8 days. What happened? He shrugged. Their plumber stopped answering. The electrician had a full schedule for the next 3 months. Somebody filed a complaint about parking and another about trash. The couple sold and left. House changed hands twice and ended up with one of Mabel's cousins. Did anyone file a report when the contractor got those anonymous emails? I asked. Ethan blinked. What emails? The contractor told me later on the phone that he'd gotten messages at odd hours that said, "You're not licensed for this jurisdiction. You're being watched. Check your insurance exclusions." He had never told the police. It's a small town, he said, and let the silence after that explain everything. I sent away for the guild's IRS filings and drove to the county courthouse to read through deeds and liens. The pattern was boring until it wasn't. Over 20 years, the Brackenridge Heritage Guild, directly or through 2 limited liability companies with innocuous names, had acquired a startling amount of real estate. Not the marquee buildings on the square. Houses on the edges. A line of trailers by the brook. 3 capes near the old mill. A farmhouse at the end of a dirt road that barely made the map. Sometimes they bought outright. More often, they stepped into loans when owners fell behind and foreclosed fast. On its own, that could be chalked up to power flowing toward power. In New England, history is capital. The guild had both. But when I looked at the titles against state missing person bulletins and change of address databases, I found something that didn't sit right in my body. 12 names from the past decade. People who signed papers, said quick goodbyes, and evaporated. Their families, living a few towns over, a county away, filed reports. Most were closed as voluntary departures. Adults are allowed to leave, the form said between the lines. They'd emptied accounts and cash. They'd walked away from steady jobs. They had not been picked up by state police. They had not showed up in a hospital. They had not, as far as paper was concerned, existed anywhere after Brackenridge. My editor texted, "Any color yet?" I typed and erased 3 versions of "maybe too much." A woman in Pittsfield agreed to meet if we drove out past the highway where the chain stores begin. Her brother had sold his house, told her he was going to North Carolina to be nearer to the ocean. He started acting like the walls were listening, she said, fingers squeezing a coffee cup that had cooled into uselessness. He kept saying, "They're not just about gingerbread trim. There's a reason they want people quiet." He promised to explain everything when he got settled. Then nothing. Phone dead, car sold, cremation arranged 3 days after he... She stopped and swallowed. After he was found. When I asked for an autopsy, Mabel said it wasn't what he wanted. There was a will. I never saw it. I'd been chasing long enough to know the difference between a hunch and a thread you could pull, and find only more thread. This was the second kind. The guild's returns came back. Nothing jumped until I noticed line items labeled Restoration Logistics. Over 5 years, those payments added up to just over $700,000. The vendor was Granite Heritage Logistics, LLC. It had no website. It had a mailbox at a UPS store 2 counties over. Its registration agent in Concord returned my call and read a prepared line about confidentiality. Using a friend who freelanced in business filings, I learned what the LLC owned: 3 refrigerated trailers and a small building out by a gravel pit with a walk-in cooler listed on the permit. I didn't sleep that night. I wrote out a list of the pieces on a yellow pad and tried to make them form a story. that wouldn't make me feel like I was inventing monsters. A preservation guild with a freezer facility. Houses changing hands quietly. People who left and then did not exist in any useful way. After a while, I quit trying to soften what my brain kept doing on its own. If you have cold storage, you aren't keeping quilts in there. I checked out of the motor court a little after 5 in the morning, tossed my keys in the slot, and drove the long way through the center of town. The lamplight bled off the wet pavement. A cat darted under a truck. Mabel stood in the museum doorway in a sweater and waved. The wave looked exactly like the person who'd handed me tea 2 days earlier. I lifted my palm off the steering wheel and did not stop. Back in the newsroom, I typed what I had, stripped out anything I could not stand up, added what I could prove, and sat with the draft until the words felt like glass, clear and cutting. My editor read it. He swore once under his breath and said, "We need to call it in. State Police, the Attorney General's office, 2 federal agencies." Then we waited in that thin air that exists between what you've put in motion and what happens because of it. Search warrants went up like sudden weather. Unmarked cars parked with their noses toward the museum. A semi with no company name idled at the gravel pit, while men in jackets you only see on television put on nitrile gloves and disappeared into the building with the cooler. Officers checked the basement of the old schoolhouse. Someone walked out of the guild office carrying a banker's box labeled compliance. The public arrest list ran 17 names deep. The charges were an alphabet soup I had to read twice. Forgery, insurance fraud, kidnapping, manslaughter, racketeering. The affidavits, once unsealed, were worse than anything I'd written because they were plain. The guild had built more than a museum of old things. They had built a machine. People in the way, owners of parcels they wanted consolidated, voices that kept speaking when politely asked not to, were isolated. Wellness checks, handled by friendly faces who also held pills and paperwork. Wills adjusted, homes deeded to shell entities, endings made to look like nature doing what nature does. Granite Heritage's trailers had moved more than furniture. Refrigeration bought time while lawyers filed papers, and families were convinced, or tried to be, that leaving without a footprint was a choice. Not every case fit the same template. That's how you keep a pattern from being obvious. Enough did. Mabel Crow stepped into a cruiser without looking at the cameras. The officer who closed the door tried to keep his expression empty. He didn't quite manage. Ethan Hale put his badge on the chief's desk the next morning and called me from a number that didn't show up. "There are things I should have pushed on," he said. "You can print that. Awards are not the point of this kind of work." But a plaque showed up on my desk the next year with my name engraved in a way that looked like permanence. All it did was remind me of the cost belonging to other people. The families who sat in court with photographs in their hands in a kind of calm that was not calm at all. The man who could not drive down the main street anymore without feeling his chest get tight. The clerk who had stamped forged deeds because someone had told her, "all in order," and who would carry that sentence around inside her like grit under skin. Brackenridge still looks right in pictures. If you crop close, if you take the shot at dusk, nothing tells you what happened there. A new board now manages what the guild once did by muscle and smiles. There are bylaws and open meetings, and a group of teenagers who repaint benches on Saturdays because it earns them community service credit and pizza. The museum reopened with an exhibit that makes some visitors angry and others quiet. One case holds ledgers and a map with pins and string. Another holds photographs of people whose names deserve to be said out loud. I go back sometimes, not for a story. I buy coffee at the general store and stand by the bell I rang on my first day. The floor still complains. The light still makes paint honest. Down the road, the covered bridge stands exactly where it did the week I arrived. Exactly where it stood a century before. If you walk across it at noon, you can see the water sliding under your feet through the gaps between planks. You can lean on the rail and listen to the world move. Behind the sound of the river, if you stay long enough, you can hear the other noise. The one every town has. The murmur that says, "Pay attention. Ask again. Don't let anyone tell you kindness depends on silence." I used to chase warm pieces to make the weekend softer. Now I write what the facts demand. Some stories leave you alone once they're in print. This one didn't. It sits on the passenger seat when I drive, quiet and insistent. When a source hesitates, I remember Mabel's wave and the bell on the museum door that sounded friendly for everyone who stepped inside. Then I ask the question that makes the room go still. And I wait, in that thin air between what you put in motion and what has to happen next, until the answer comes. Diego Salinas spent 3 years stashing tips, selling tools he didn't truly need, and working double shifts under other people's lifts so he could someday hang his own shingle. He grew up on the west side of Birmingham, the oldest son of immigrants who measured progress in steady paychecks, and neighbors who knew your name. Cars were his first language. By 21, he could listen to an idling engine and tell you which cylinder was sulking. By 33 and early 2022, he rolled into a small town called Pine Ridge, Alabama, 2,000 souls and a highway that brought more dust than tourists, and thought, this is where I can make it work. Pine Ridge sat along State Route 14, a strip of asphalt that cut between soy fields and timber lots before curling past a main street, lined with sturdy brick from a richer time. The old cotton money was gone, but the buildings remained. Square shoulders and high windows stubborn as mules. The rent on a retired service station at the edge of downtown was something he could swing if business showed up. The bay doors faced the road. The office had a window, and there was a gravel lot where trucks could nose in without blocking traffic. Diego swept out the bays, painted the walls, wired in brighter lights, and screwed his last saved dollar into a Pepsi machine that rattled like a lucky charm. For a while, it happened the way he'd pictured. The first month, farmers rolled in with dented F-150s, and a hay rake welded one too many times. Retirees brought careful sedans for brakes and belts, and just listen to that sound. Honey. Working parents sat in plastic chairs while he showed them on a tablet what a control arm bushing looked like before and after. His prices were fair. He called when he said he would. He printed estimates you could understand and didn't replace parts that didn't need replacing. By spring, he had 2 part-time techs, Summer, who could find electrical gremlins with a multimeter and a stair, and Jalen, who was 19 and fearless around stuck bolts. The visit came on a hot Monday that smelled like hot tar and cut grass. Dark SUV eased in, doors opening like a ceremony. 3 people stepped out in suits no one wore to sweat in. A thick-set man with a sunburned neck, a woman with a mayor's smile, and a third fellow who said nothing and watched everything. The big man offered his hand. Ralph Kinney, he said. Pine Ridge Commerce Council. He nodded at the woman. Mayor Porter, the quiet one, Hugh Carver. I run Carver Farms. Diego wiped his palm on a rag before shaking. Kinney's grip was soft, but went on too long. They stood in the office where Diego had put up a calendar with classic trucks and a cheap fan that did more noise than air. Kinney explained that the council looked after cohesion, which meant, he said, welcoming new enterprises and keeping the playing field balanced. In Pine Ridge, he added, good neighbors joined the council, showed up at monthly breakfasts, kicked in for beautification projects, and took part in group ads the council bought in Montgomery and on local radio. We like to say we keep the wolves away from the henhouse, Kinney said with a chuckle that didn't reach his eyes. Mayor Porter, neat in navy and pearls, added that membership smoothed permits, utility hookups and the like. We've invested in our town. We expect partners, not free riders. How much? Diego asked. $500 a month, Kinney said, as if that were a tip jar amount. Plus special assessments when we do something big, like holiday lighting or the fall festival. Diego looked at the oil-stained floor, at the scuffed chair where customers sat, the jar where he kept tiny fuses for people who walked in frantic. 500 would be 2 sets of tires he hadn't sold yet. I think I'll pass, he said, trying to keep his voice even. I'm just getting my feet under me. I'll help on cleanup days, sponsor a little league team if you've got one. But I'd like to keep my costs focused on the work. Kinney's smile didn't slip. We'll circle back, he said. The mayor wrote something on a clipboard Diego hadn't noticed before. Carver nodded once, like a man noting weather. The next week turned strange. An inspector Diego had seen twice in 3 months arrived with a checklist that might as well have been a book. The shop's air compressor needed a cage. The eye wash station should be closer to the lift. The solvent cabinet was not of an approved rating. 2 days later, the fire marshal stopped by, tapping outlets with a pen and flagging a breaker label that had faded to gray. 30 days, he said kindly enough, or I'm required to close you down until it's corrected. The following Monday, a man from the state environmental office, shirt crisp, boots too clean to have known a shop floor, took photos of the waste oil tank and asked where Diego stored used filters. We had a complaint, he said when Diego asked who. Anonymous, fines multiplied like rabbits. He paid them because you pay them, and he hired an electrician who worked out of his truck and who, after glancing at the stack of notices, quoted a number that made Diego breathe through his nose to avoid saying something dumb. Summer and Jalen picked up extra hours to install a safety shower and rerun conduit in gray metal, so clean it looked like a hospital. They told jokes while they worked. Diego laughed along, then went home to spreadsheets and a quiet panic he hid from his mother on Sunday calls. Business cooled, not all at once, but like a slow leak. Familiar trucks started driving past with little nods through the windshield. A couple of families he'd gotten used to seeing. At 10 on Saturdays now went to the dealer in Prattville. They had a coupon. A handyman who'd sent him steady. Work for months texted an apology about a new arrangement. People he didn't. Noel began arriving not with broken cars, but with questions. Do you use Riemann parts? Did the state fine you? Is your insurance comprehensive? He could hear where the questions came from by the way they were asked, like there was a script and everyone got their page. Late one evening, when the shadows had turned the lot blue and his office light made the bugs go crazy, a customer named Miss Opal knocked on the open bay and stepped inside. She was 70th a day, stubborn about keeping her Buick on the road, and the kind of person who brought you muffins at Christmas because you replaced her battery in the rain without charging for labor. She looked over her shoulder before she spoke. I shouldn't be here, she said, but I wanted to tell you what they're doing. Who? Them. She didn't say the council's name like it might catch fire in the air. I ran into Mr. Kinney at Pritchard's Market. He told me folks who keep coming to you might get tangled up when state matters shake out. Said it would be safer to stick with approved vendors. Then he handed me a coupon for oil changes at Garrison Motor on the bypass. She held it up like proof, a fat discount for proud Pine Ridge residents. Diego felt heat climb his neck. I'm not under investigation, he said. I got inspected, hard, I paid the fines. I fixed what they asked. Miss Opal's hands twisted. They do more than talk, honey. People who don't get with their program have bad luck. Freezers fail. Keys go missing. Someone backs a truck into your front door and keeps going. She swallowed. Don't let them catch you alone. Then she hugged him once hard and left. He didn't sleep. The next morning, he drove to the courthouse in the county seat and spent 4 hours under fluorescent lights, flipping through deeds and UCC filings until the clerk took pity and brought him water. He traced the last 5 businesses that had bucked the council. An appliance store, a nail salon, a diner on the square, a place that had tried to sell used lawn equipment, and another mechanic before him. In each case, a shell company with a bland name. Pine Creek Holdings. Red Barn Properties, Lakeview Asset Group, had gobbled the property within months of trouble, paying prices that were an insult to the paint still drying on the walls. The registered agents, when he looked them up, lived at P.O. boxes or in the same ranch house at the edge of town, where a certain farm's mailbox sat at the road. He also found insurance claims that read like fiction if you didn't know the town. A kitchen fire in the one diner that didn't put the council's logo in its window. A gas explosion at a garage whose owner had told Diego over coffee that he'd never pay a bully to stand on my neck. A burglary at the appliance store where nothing went missing except the hard drives from the POS system, and a safe with a ledger inside. Every payout made an ally stronger. Every closure cleaned the street for someone already in the circle. Diego started doing what scared people do when they decide fear won't fix anything. He recorded conversations when it was legal. He snapped photos of visitors who got too nosy about his waste hauler or his noise level. He kept a logbook with times and names. He drove to 2 towns over and met a baker who'd had the same men in different suits explain how community alignment worked. She cried into her napkin when she told him how she'd finally signed the paper and how her father hadn't spoken to her for a month after because we don't bend to men like that. He made a copy of everything and kept it at his cousin's place in Birmingham. On a Sunday night in October, someone jimmied the office door. The cash drawer held $67. It was still there in the morning. The cheap safe that contained old registrations and photocopies of IDs was open, papers in a swirl like leaves after a truck passed. His laptop, which he'd started backing up to an external drive each night and taking home, sat dead center on his desk with the webcam taped over. A message had been scrawled on a sticky note and left on the keyboard. "You're out of your lane." He stared at it for a long time. Then he drove to Birmingham and walked into the Federal Building with a folder under his arm, and the look of someone who is finished being polite. He asked to speak to whoever handled public corruption and organized extortion. 2 agents sat him in a small room, brought water, and told him to start at the beginning. He did. He talked until his mouth went dry, then slid the photos across the table. The property records, the printouts from the Secretary of State's database showing who signed what and when. One agent asked careful questions about dates and whether he'd ever been asked outright for cash to make a problem go away. The other wrote with a pen that never seemed to stop. A month passed where everything felt like pause. Business limped. He kept his head down and his locks changed. He thought more than once about calling Kinney to say fine, he'd pay. Just stop. He didn't. Then the dam cracked. It wasn't only his folder, he learned later. Other people in other counties had walked into other federal buildings with other stacks of paper, and the same tired look. Unmarked cars began showing up on the edge of town. The county courthouse went quiet as a tomb for one afternoon, while people in dark jackets carried boxes. A day later at dawn, the sheriff's department and state investigators and the folks Diego had met in Birmingham knocked on doors at the same time. At the mayor's house, at Kinney's office, at the bank owned by Porter's husband, at Carver's farm, at a warehouse behind the feed store where a forklift had scraped grooves into concrete under pallets no one could account for on any inventory list. Papers that had never existed suddenly did. And they did not tell a story the council wanted told. The charges when they came were a list long enough to need 2 columns: racketeering, extortion, mail fraud, wire fraud, arson for profit, conspiracy, bribery. The complaint described in plain language how the Pine Ridge Commerce Council and its partners had turned a town into a toll road. Join and pay and your lane stayed open. Resist and your tires mysteriously went flat while a state car followed you for a week. If you sold and left, your deed passed to a company that was only a name until the ink dried. 17 people were arrested. More resigned. A few cut deals and told stories that made Diego's hands shake when he read them in the paper. One of them mentioned Miss Opal by name as someone they'd tried to scare. The judge scolded them in open court and ordered protection for half the witnesses. The bank changed leadership. The mayor did not run again. The farm on the edge of town changed how it did business, or at least changed who signed the checks. Diego kept his shop closed for 6 weeks while he slept like a person who had been tense for a year and only just realized it. He reopened with a cookout. Summer and Jalen wore new shirts with the shop name stitched straight this time. People came. Some said they were sorry for staying away. He said he understood because he did. Fear is a tool, so is shame. He refused to use either in his business. Pine Ridge is not magically fixed. Empty storefronts don't fill up because someone signs a plea agreement. It takes years to rebuild trust after you learn the welcome committee was also the wrecking crew. The town council formed a new business association with bylaws you can read without squinting, and dues you can afford without skipping a mortgage payment. They publish minutes. They put their budget online. They call the state when someone shows up unannounced with a clipboard and a threat. Folks still talk about the bad years, but they do it on porches in daylight. When Diego finishes a timing chain or a crank sensor or the 1,000 little jobs that keep strangers moving, he sometimes thinks about the first visit. The big man's hand. The way the mayor's pen made a note he never saw. He thinks about how close he came to giving in, because it would have been simpler, and how many people never had an option to fight. Then he turns the sign to open again the next morning, and when someone comes through the door scared, because a dashboard light is on, and life feels like a dashboard light too. He does what he has always done. He listens. He explains. He charges what it costs. He gets them back on the road. And when the bell over the door rings behind them, it sounds like normal. Like a town trying to be what it said it was all along. Dr. Mara Alvarez liked the parts of history that didn't make it into parade speeches. At 38, teaching American Studies at the University of Nebraska, she'd built a career on reading the margins, letters tucked in cookbooks, minutes no one bothered to index, rumors that never got typed up. When the Flatwater Heritage Council asked her to write a book for Meadow Vale's 150th, she said yes. The town sat 45 miles west of Lincoln, close enough for news, far enough to keep its own weather. Meadow Vale had 901 residents the year she arrived. Most houses carried surnames you could find on headstones from the 1870s. The first families were German farmers who bought prairie from the railroad and squared it with fences and hymnals. The council chair was Edwin Romer, insurance man, city council veteran, grandson of an original claimant. He greeted Mara on the courthouse steps with a practiced smile. "We're proud of what we've kept," he said. "We'd like the story told properly." He handed over a key to the library basement and a list of welcoming interviewees. The archives lived under humming lights and pipework. Jeanette Cole, the librarian, knew every box by feel. There were council minutes, school board binders, church rosters, women's club yearbooks, and 4 drawers of labeled photographs whose captions marched straight from the 1880s into the glossy 1950s. Then the trail thinned. The early and mid-1960s were smeared like rain across ink. Council minutes hinted at household turnover and reorganization of civic associations. The attachments that should have explained those phrases weren't there. Jeanette said a flood had gotten some boxes in the 80s. "Breaks my heart," she added and patted the shelf. Mara started with front porches and potluck kitchens. People had plenty to share. Barn raisings, blizzards, the year a twister took the elevator roof. When she asked about 1964 and 1965, conversations shrank. "Those were tense days," one man said, and changed the subject to wheat prices. "Folks did what they thought best," a woman told her, eyes on her clasped hands. People under 50 looked genuinely blank, like a skipped page no one noticed. The box that changed everything came from a realtor's daughter who was emptying a bungalow on Cedar Street. "Mom kept things," the daughter said, placing the worn carton on Mara's passenger seat. Inside were clippings from Lincoln and Omaha, snapshots and notes in a neat looping hand. Mara read late with a lamp and felt her scalp tighten. In the summer of 1964, 12 Meadow Vale households, 52 people, disappeared over 6 weeks. Front doors were locked, dishes sat drying, coats hung on hooks, bank accounts and paychecks lay untouched. There were no moving trucks, no forwarding addresses, just houses that still smelled like supper. They weren't the town's old lines. Most had moved in within 5 years. They'd started attending meetings, volunteering, proposing small changes, Sunday sales, an updated curriculum, allowing civic groups without church membership requirements. Their absence ended the debates. Newspapers from the time ran headlines like "Mystery on the Plains." The sheriff told a reporter it looked like families seeking opportunity elsewhere. Facts argued back. One couple had lumber stacked on a lot for a house that never rose. Another had enrolled a child for the fall term. Photographs showed a table set for a birthday, candles unlit. Mara drove to the county courthouse and asked for records. The clerk smiled and said the sheriff's files from '64 were misplaced during the remodel. Property transfers, though, were public. Deeds tied to the missing passed hands within months. Each sale went through a short-lived Topeka law office that no longer existed. The buyers of record were trusts with vague names that later sold, cheaply, to people whose names showed up on the Heritage Council's donor wall. The prices were low enough to make Mara sit back in her chair. She took her questions to Romer. In his office, he kept every family photograph in identical silver frames. When Mara outlined what she'd read and what she couldn't find, his smile didn't move. "Professor, fragments can mislead," he said, voice cordial and firm. "Those years were difficult. Some left, others stayed. We endured. This book is meant to celebrate. We've had concerns about framing, frankly. Folks wonder if an outsider will appreciate what holds a place like this together. It wasn't a threat in words. It didn't need to be. Mara worked quieter. She scanned in a colleague's office in Lincoln. She met 2 nieces and a grandson of the missing at gas station diners off Highway 6. One remembered an uncle starting a civic club. For everyone. Pew or no pew. He'd told her mother, "We're being watched," and then he was gone. Another showed a postcard that arrived a year later. "All is well. Don't look," in handwriting the family swore wasn't right. The pattern spilled out of the 60s. During the Depression, 3 families who'd argued for federal relief faded from the minutes and from photographs. In the early 50s, after the Supreme Court ruled on school segregation, supporters of compliance left suddenly and sold for less than tax valuation. Each episode featured the same small cluster of surnames occupying boards, setting calendars, approving loans, what Meadow Vale called pillars. Power lived in positions and also around them. The bank manager was a cousin to the council chair. The feed store owner chaired the school board. The pastor's brother ran the road district. You could avoid breaking a law and still close a door. A permit could get slow. A loan could come with terms that bent a person. A family could find their name missing from the bake sale roster, and the contractor too busy. After a while, leaving could look like a decision. Mara went to the state. A KBI investigator listened and said the part no one prints. Too long ago, too little physical evidence, too many funerals between then and now. If you find bones, he said, not unkindly, we can talk. A federal office sent a form letter. A colleague warned her about picking winnable fights. A plain envelope arrived at her university mailbox. No return address. One line, "You don't belong here." That week, her dean asked for a chat about community partnerships and tone. She withdrew from the project with a polite email about timelines. The council hired a local columnist who wrote affectionate pieces about pancake breakfasts and harvest parades. His book arrived before the celebration. Thick paper, bright photos, captions that read like hymn refrains. The section on the 60s used phrases like temporary outmigration and renewed focus on shared values. People posed with antique tractors under bunting while a brass quartet played America the Beautiful. Tourists said it felt like stepping into a postcard. They weren't wrong. Mara kept the box on a shelf and taught her classes. She told her students what she could say without naming names. That archives are built with choices. That silence is a kind of curation. That small places can be generous and fierce. And sometimes the fierceness wins. She didn't assign Meadow Vale as a case study. She didn't need to. In October, she drove back and parked outside the library. The courthouse clock sounded the hour. Main Street's false fronts were painted fresh. The kind of colors you get when a paint committee votes. A new camera watched the library door. She looked at the windows she'd stared through and thought about the people who had sat in those rooms and agreed. Over decades on what counted as us. On a gray Sunday, she spread the contents of the box again. There was a snapshot of a picnic on a lawn that no longer belonged to the pictured family. Kids holding watermelon, a father squinting against sun, a mother bracing a toddler's hand wrapped in napkin. On the back, the date and one word, stay. A clipping quoted a pastor saying the community was guarding its soul. A penciled note in the margin read, "At what price?" She tried to imagine the missing first nights. Bed slept in or not, the tug to leave, the knock at a door, the quiet shape of agreement. She tried to tally what this kind of story costs a place. The way children learn to read a room before they read a book. The way people lower their voices when they disagree. The way welcome contains a silent clause. Sometimes she thought about publishing everything online at once. Scans, deeds, the postcard that didn't look right. Then she pictured the phone calls to her parents, the voicemail from a number that knew her schedule, the way rumors move faster than facts in towns with one stoplight. She wasn't afraid of the truth. She was afraid of what truth does to people who must keep eating breakfast across from each other. The Meadow Vale book sits on her shelf beside the box. It's handsome, full of faces who look like the faces in the box, separated by a decision about what to remember. When students ask what she's working on, she says she's writing about how communities tell their own stories. If they press, she says, sometimes a place keeps the shape of something it refuses to name. The following spring, she stopped at the town on her way to a different courthouse. The fields were 1,000 colors of brown. A boy rode a bike in slow loops outside the hardware store. She stood at the edge of the square and listened. The sound of a quiet town is not silence. It's the soft machinery of agreement. She drove on and thought of the families whose names she had written on sticky notes. The houses that sold cheap. The dinners that cooled on tables. The meetings where the words no one recorded did the work. History is what happened, she told her class later that week. Memory is what we keep. Power is who decides the difference. She didn't say Meadow Vale. She didn't have to. I moved to Brook Hollow in May of 2023 because the place felt like a promise I wanted to believe. 25 minutes east of Columbus, tucked into low green hills, the town had white-fenced lawns and maples that arched over the streets like careful hands. Real estate photos had shown brick colonials with deep porches, the kind of tidy sidewalks where kids chalk hopscotch squares and nobody worries about traffic. After a long divorce and too many years of cramped apartments, I bought a 2-story on Hawthorne Lane with a sagging swing and a backyard where the previous owners had coaxed roses into doing impossible things. The welcome came the way it always does in neighborhoods like this. Fresh bread on the porch, a handwritten card tucked under the doormat, a woman with perfect posture and soft gray hair standing at my gate as if she lived there. She introduced herself as Margaret Vale and handed me a heavy cream envelope sealed with a gold sticker shaped like a peony. Inside was an invitation to join the Brook Hollow Beautification Society, which she described as a group of women who keep our public spaces lovely and our standards steady. Dues were modest. Members got nursery discounts, access to master gardeners, and first pick for the annual home and garden tour that filled the town each June. I'd been a marketing manager for a software company in Chicago. My job had gone fully remote. My biggest plan for the summer was to learn the names of perennials. I said yes to the invitation because that's what you do when you're new and want to fit into something that looks like a postcard. The first meeting was in the fellowship hall at First Presbyterian. 30 or 40 women sat at round tables with coffee in porcelain cups and lemon bars arranged on doilies. The talk was about mulch and native species and the July hanging basket competition. Margaret ran the meeting with the easy authority of someone who never had to raise her voice. Every motion passed. Every suggestion landed like a decision already made. People laughed at her jokes before she finished them. When I introduced myself, she squeezed my hand and said I'd taken on a house with good bones and great potential, in a way that felt both kind and like I'd signed up for a syllabus. It took a few weeks for the shine to crack. It happened in whispers. There was a couple, the Armitages, who had moved on. A woman in linen gave me the bullet points between sips of coffee. They'd put vegetables in their front yard. They'd installed solar panels facing the street. Their kids shouted after dinner. They never joined the society. Lovely people, the woman said as if closing a file. Just not the right fit for Brook Hollow. I nodded and told myself not to jump to conclusions. People move. Tastes clash. Communities figure out their balance. Then I met the Callaways. They lived 2 blocks over in a clapboard house older than mine. The kind with a brick walkway and window boxes that once had geraniums like fireworks. Mr. Callaway had Parkinson's. Mrs. Callaway had a hip that needed replacing. The yard showed it. Ivy creeping where it shouldn't. A half-collapsed trellis, leaves left too long at the base of the hydrangeas. I suggested at a meeting that we put together a volunteer crew for them. One Saturday of pruning and edging would have made a world of difference. Margaret smiled without warmth. Our mission is to preserve standards, Nora, she said, pronouncing my name like a gentle correction. Not to enable neglect. The citation started the next week. A city inspector left orange tags on the Callaway's porch for yard debris, overgrown vegetation, and obstructed sidewalk, each with a fine that looked small until you added them up. A neighbor began sweeping the sidewalk in front of their house midday, loudly, commenting to nobody about what happens when people let things go. Contractors the Callaways had used for years stopped answering their calls. When I asked one at the hardware store why, He looked at the floor and said his schedule was full through fall. At church coffee hour, someone said the Callaway's homeowner's insurance might not renew. Hazards, a woman explained, as if reporting the weather. The premium letter came the week after, the font of the threat large enough to read from the stoop. When the couple listed their house, a local developer bought it for less than the county's assessment. Within a month, the crew he hired ripped up the backyard and put in a pergola you could see from 3 streets away. The new owners were in the society by their second Tuesday. I told myself to leave it. I'd moved here to be new, not to start a fight. But I worked in messaging for a living, and once you notice how things are said, it's hard not to notice what goes unsaid. Families left. Units came on the market and went off before the signs settled. People who didn't join the society were busy until their porch lights went dark. A family on Birch replaced their grass with a pollinator garden and spent the next 6 months answering letters from the code office about height, variance, and sightline obstructions. Single mother across from the park put a basketball hoop at the edge of her drive and found it dented 3 mornings in a row, then found herself without after-school pickup because a neighbor had to reprioritize. By October, I'd started helping the Society's records chair sort old files in a small room at City Hall. The Beautification Society kept its own minutes and newsletters, of course, but it also kept copies of letters, photographs of problem areas, and lists. So many lists. Lawn care companies that offered member rates. Painters who understood our palette. Names and addresses of new arrivals with notes about where they worked, what schools their kids were enrolled in, and whether the homeowners had affinities that might clash with neighborhood expectations. It would have felt like nosy ant gossip if not for the section labeled monitoring. Inside were thicker folders. Photographs of houses taken from different angles over months. Logs of visitors' cars with timestamps. Clippings about estate sales. Copies of complaints filed with the city. Some anonymous, some signed by people I recognized from the pastry table. One man's file included his mortgage details and a note that he'd been denied a refinance. Another had printouts of her Facebook posts with highlighted captions about defunding. Watch for signs, someone had written in the margin. I told myself again to put the lid back on and walk away. Instead, I kept reading. Some folders were labeled resolved. Attached were closing disclosures showing sales days after a burst of enforcement activity. A few had obituaries. The pattern made the back of my neck go cold. A widow who refused to sell fell down the back steps, wasn't found until morning. A retired teacher mixed up her medication, didn't answer the phone, passed quietly. A man who'd told 3 neighbors he wouldn't be priced out of the block had a space heater fire that stayed small, but filled the house with smoke while he slept. In each case, a note in another folder showed a congratulatory email from a member to Margaret about a sensitive situation, elegantly settled, followed by a deed transfer, followed by a welcome to the society email to the new owners. I took photographs with my phone. I told myself I was imagining patterns where there were none. I told myself I'd ask questions in a way that didn't burn bridges. Then Detective O'Rourke walked into the records room with Margaret at his shoulder. He smiled like he did at the July pancake breakfast. Margaret put a manicured hand on my elbow and remarked on the importance of safeguarding our community's private materials. That night, when I tried to open the pictures on my laptop, the files were there and then they weren't, replaced by icons that said corrupted. I hadn't synced to the cloud yet. I hadn't expected to need to be clever. Things got smaller after that. My mailbox leaned one morning, its post loosened by a wrench. The basil in my kitchen planter died overnight, though I hadn't touched it. Someone keyed a neat straight line down the driver's side of my car in the grocery store lot. A city inspector knocked and asked to see my sump pump for stormwater compliance. I laughed, and then I didn't. And then I shut the door and leaned against it, and listened for footsteps coming back up the walk. I sent what I had left, the notes I'd scribbled in a notebook, 3 screenshots I'd texted to myself before my files died, to a friend who knew people at the state. He told me to sit tight. Don't talk to local, he said. Let this go up a level. The next afternoon, a potted plant sat on my kitchen table when I came back from a run. Glossy leaves, white flowers with a faint sweet smell. I didn't own a cat, but if I had, it would have been in danger. Oleander knows what it is without a label. There wasn't a note. There didn't need to be. I emailed the FBI tip line and got a form reply. I drove to a coffee shop 2 towns over to meet a woman whose aunt had lived on my street until last winter. We traded details like people in a spy movie, and both felt ridiculous and both kept going. She'd seen the society's welcome packet after her aunt died, buried in a drawer, a neat binder of vendors and rules and a page about house colors that read like scripture. "It's all smiles until it isn't," she said, halfway into her cup. "Then it's a machine." The machine had many parts. The code office took complaints seriously. When names on certain stationery appeared, the assessor's office found updates to valuations. Insurance adjusters responded in a day to the right phone calls. A detective married to a society member wrote "no foul play" and meant it. The society raised money for parks and library reading corners and a scholarship for a senior who wrote an essay about civic pride. The mayor spoke at their luncheon every spring. Elected officials posed in front of hanging baskets for photos that went in the weekly paper, along with a column about how Brook Hollow remained a standard bearer for tasteful living. I didn't sleep well in November. Wind moved through the gutters and sounded like whispering. I stopped turning on the porch light at night. If you've never felt watched by people who would swear they were only minding the neighborhood, you can't know how your shoulders live around your ears. 2 things happened quickly then. A tip reached the right agent. New Neighbor's Ring camera caught a man in a city polo shirt placing a code violation sticker on a house at midnight. The woman whose aunt had died found the aunt's pill organizer had been refilled wrong the week before she fell. The case hopped jurisdictions. Search warrants appear faster when someone in another county recognizes a pattern and cares. They seized a laptop from a society treasurer. They served a notice at City Hall for communications between the society and code enforcement. They took hard drives from 2 desktops and a backup drive from a home office with a lacquered desk. That's how it always looks in the photos. Men and women in windbreakers carrying boxes, while neighbors watch from behind curtains. Certain it's a misunderstanding until it isn't. The charges named 12 people: conspiracy, elder abuse, insurance fraud, obstruction. In 2 cases, manslaughter. Margaret was in the first line of the press release. Her profile picture with a ribbon on it still sat on the society's page the night the news broke. People wrote comments about witch hunts and jealousy, and the goodness of women who keep towns beautiful. People also called cousins and said, "I knew it," in voices that held both shame and relief. I left Brook Hollow before Thanksgiving. My front yard hadn't needed me to fight for it. I packed my books in the cast iron pan I'd bought at a yard sale and drove away with the swing still creaking on the porch. The paper ran a story with my name in it because I had provided documents and testimony. That brought a wave of emails from places I'd never heard of. Other towns with other clubs and other words for the same thing. Who gets to stay? Who gets squeezed until they go? The roses in my new yard don't do anything impossible. I pick the beetles off and try not to crush them. I plant lavender because the soil wants it. I still like tidy hedges and swept walks. I still love a street where kids draw chalk suns. But when I pass a row of perfect gardens now, I look for the seams. Whose hands keep it that way, how many phone calls it takes, what it costs the people who can't or won't pay it. Brook Hollow still has prize dahlias and a banner downtown that says "Welcome" in letters taller than a 3rd grader. Property values haven't fallen. People say the scandal was overblown and mostly politics. Some of the women charged took pleas. 1 trial hung. The detective retired. The city hired a new code director who talks in public about transparency and fairness. The society dissolved and then reappeared as the Friends of Brook Hollow in a smaller room with fewer names on the sign-in sheet. When friends ask what happened there, I say the simplest thing I can. A group of people decided their picture of a neighborhood mattered more than the people in it. They learned how to make that picture stay true. They found levers and pulled them. Once you see the levers, you can't unsee them. On early mornings in my new town, I water the front bed and wave to runners I haven't met yet. The hydrangea at the corner is sulking, as hydrangeas do, so I tell it we're learning each other. A kid down the street has a hoop in his driveway, and the thunk of the ball is steady and good. I hear the sound and think about how quiet can be a kind of pressure, and how noise can mean life. and how a place can be lovely without anyone needing to leave to make it so. I was packing away decoys for the winter when the envelope slid out with the rest of the mail. Thick, creamy paper with a stag embossed in copper at the top. I don't get much that isn't bills or catalogs. The letter knew my name, spelled right, and praised my reputation for fair chase and respect for the land. It invited me, personally, to a 3-day hunt at the Silver Basin Hunt Club outside Sage Hollow, Idaho. Lodging, meals, rifles, everything provided. Bring clothes, boots, licenses. The fee was so low it barely covered gas. I'm 54, newly retired from the wildlife division after 27 years of counting elk calves and breaking up poaching rings. I told myself I was too old to get flattered by stationery. But the truth is, the invitation warmed a hollow place. My daughter lives 2 states away. The house is quiet. A weekend in big country with people who knew the same trails sounded like a good way to fill some space. Sage Hollow sits in a bowl of dark timber and slate ridges. The kind of town where the diner gives you the regular's coffee on your second visit, and the hardware store still keeps a book by the register. The clubhouse sat above it all. Massive peeled log beams, river rock chimney big enough to roast a moose, a flag snapping in a high wind. If you'd told me it was built in 1930 for railroad men who liked their whiskey neat, I'd have believed you. A man named Alden Pierce greeted me on the steps. 70 maybe, but the kind of 70 built from saddle leather and cold mornings. His handshake was dry and firm. We talked mule deer migration like old neighbors. He knew the North Forks by nickname. He asked after a field biologist I hadn't seen in years. If you'd handed me a form that said, "Is this man trustworthy?" I would have signed it without reading the fine print. The other invitees were the kind you find on trailheads before sunrise. A rancher from near Dillon, a contractor out of Ogden, a physician from Spokane, a retired lieutenant colonel who introduced himself as Cole and wore the posture like a pressed shirt. No one could quite say how the club had found them. "Friend of a friend," the contractor said. "Heard it was the real thing," the rancher added. Everyone had good gear, quiet boots, the mixed look of patience and appetite you see at the edge of a good meadow. Day 1 was clean and ordinary. We split into pairs and rode out in old but well-kept 4x4s, past wind-scarred pines into bowls of sun-bleached grass. Guides pointed at benches they'd scouted, at pockets where cows liked to bed. I wouldn't have picked the bull I took at last light. It was a chance shot quartering away. But I put it behind the shoulder and watched him go down quick. Dinner was venison backstrap and too much pie. We told lies and truths in front of a fireplace big enough to drive a truck through, and went to bed under wool blankets that smelled faintly of cedar. Morning 2 started sideways. Instead of heading out with the same guides, we were told to report to the gear room. A young man in a club vest issued each of us a top-end rifle with a suppressor already mounted, 2 spare magazines, a chest rig with a radio I'd last seen on fire crews, and a set of thermal binoculars you could identify a rabbit with at 300 yards. "Today we test adaptability," he said like he was reading it off a cue card. I asked Alden why I needed thermals to shoot an ungulate on a clear October morning. He smiled the way principals do before they hand out detentions. "You've chased everything that walks," he said. "Let us show you a hunt that will make you feel 20 again." We rolled deeper into the backcountry in trucks without plates, tires aired down for rock. I watched the country change from open fur to blowdown, to the kind of broken ridges where cell service expires and maps go philosophical. They dropped us at a clearing at first light and paired us off new, me with Cole. He had the air of a man for whom maps are only a suggestion. "Follow my lead," he said, clipping his radio to his shoulder strap. "Don't get cute. I've worked with people who think cute means human." The first clue I was not where I thought I was came by a creek. Somebody had camped there within the last 24 hours. A blue tent cheap, a scattering of ramen packets, a pile of firewood that steamed in the cold air like it still remembered flame. The tracks in and out were wide-set and sloppy, the way they are when you're tired and hungry and don't know to lift your feet properly. A floss pick lay on a flat rock. I picked it up without thinking and heard Cole clear his throat. "Leave sign alone," he said mildly. "You're contaminating the picture." He wasn't wrong, and that scared me more than if he'd been an amateur. I bent to look closer. The boot prints were wrong for this place. Thin soles worn down, more city than ridge. There were smaller tracks too, bare for a few steps by the water. Each one had imprinted the ridges of a foot. Not elk, not deer, not cat. People. We track, Cole said. We don't moralize. The argument I started died in my throat because there's a tone people can use to end a conversation without raising their voice. I've used it when I've had to tell a man I found his snares. Cole had it, we moved upslope. The radio whispered occasionally with other voices. Echo 2, cross-bearing 90. Thermal ping at 150. They used words like asset and package and movement vector. We found 2 more camps. Hasty, dirty. A scatter of things that mattered once and didn't now because oxygen had been worth more. A postcard with an Ohio skyline. A sweatshirt cut to make a bandage. The cardboard back of a spiral notebook with the last part of a grocery list. Salt, toothbrush, socks. By noon the air was thin enough to hurt and my stomach felt like it was full of gravel. I was trying to come up with a plan that didn't end with me at the bottom of a draw. When Cole's radio hissed, and Alden's voice, calm as ever, said, "Confirm status on Blue Ridge. Asset appears pinned high." "Copy," Cole said. He looked at me like a teacher deciding if the student can be trusted with the key to the lab. "We drive her down. You block. Do not improvise." Her, I didn't know if he meant it literally or as shorthand. We cut across the slope into rocks that had broken off the ridge in some other century. The world tilted, rebalanced, tilted again. My knees ached. My heart ran too fast. Then I saw the cave, a black notch under a fallen slab where you might tuck in. For a storm if you were young and didn't know what a bluff looks like on a map, Cole pointed me to a choke point where 2 pines grew close and the ground narrowed into a kind of ramp. "Here," he said. "If she runs this way, you fire." I took the spot but not the order. I set my rifle across my pack and thought about the fastest way to jam a radio without making it obvious. Then did nothing because I'm not an idiot, and he was watching me the way you watch a man thinking about touching a hot stove. He moved around the backside of the outcrop, sure-footed, methodical. I waited, listening to my breath travel in and out like a saw. The quiet, I could hear another sound under the wind. A quick, shallow breathing like a bird trapped in a pipe. "Don't shoot," I said softly, to whoever was in the dark. "I won't." A face appeared in the gloom, 20 maybe, hair pushed back with shaking hands, eyes filmed with fear and grit. She didn't speak. She looked at the rifle, at my hands, at the trees like they might offer advice. "Stay," I whispered. "Please." Cole shouted my name from the other side of the rock. And at the same moment, the world cracked open with a flat voice from above us. "Put the weapons down." Game warden uniforms never looked like much in brochures. In person, on a ridge, a badge and a belt and a steady 2-handed grip looked like the difference between mistakes and funerals. The warden up on the stone shelf had her stance set and her eyes on both of us. She wore a patch that said RE. "Hands where I can see them," she said. "Now." Cole didn't raise his rifle, which I guess is the best thing I can say about him. He also didn't drop it. "Officer," he called, friendly as a neighbor. "We're in the middle of a sanctioned—" "Save it," she said. "I've got a complaint about night shots and untagged vehicles." "We're going to talk." I put my hands out and let my rifle hang on the strap. "2 steps left," she told me. She pointed at the cave. "Stay put." The young woman didn't move. Alden's voice came over the radio again, this time colder. "Stage Team 4. We have interference." Ree's head tilted like she was listening to more than sound. She kept the muzzle steady and spoke quickly into a shoulder mic. Whatever she said brought the faint, tinny reply of dispatch somewhere down the mountain. Then she looked back at us and made a calculation I could see happen behind her eyes. "You," she told me. "Who are you with?" I gave her my name and department and old badge number. Person in our line of work can tell the difference between a lie and a truth that hurts. "Not with him," I added. "Not like this. Is there a person in that cave?" she asked. "Yes," I said. Cole's jaw worked. "Officer, this is a misunderstanding." "No," she said. "It's not." She backed down the slope with professional patience, keeping both of us in her view, and put herself at an angle where she could see into the cave without giving up her cover. "Ma'am," she called, voice softened. "I'm a game warden." I'm going to help you, but I need you to sit tight. Sirens don't carry well in mountains. You don't hear them until they're on you. What you do hear, if you're listening, is the helicopter thud getting its feet under it miles away and coming this direction. You hear radios start to overlap and lose words to wind. You hear old men on private channels choose whether to cut their losses or double down. Alden doubled down. Voices on Cole's radio got busier. Packet. Negative. Hold. Seal the ridge road. Ree must have read the same weather. She brought out zip ties. On your knees, she said to Cole, clear and firm. He hesitated half a blink too long, then did what people do when they meet someone who isn't guessing. I stuck my wrists out. She tightened the plastic, not cruel, just sure, and called our situation in with coordinates that sang like numbers do when you've been lost and are found. By dusk, the ridge looked like a small, grim fair. Sheriff's trucks, state police, a search and rescue UTV nosing around blowdown, a medic talking gently to the woman from the cave while she drank something sweet and clutched the bottle like a talisman. A detective in a brown jacket asking me the kind of questions I spent a career asking other people. They went up to the club with a warrant before midnight. By morning, the lodge had turned into a hive of paper being carried in boxes and computers wrapped in anti-static bags. You learn a lot about people by what they keep lists of. The Silver Basin Hunt Club kept intake forms with medical suitability checks the way outfitters do, only these were for assets, not clients. They kept travel routes and cash, ledgers and a schedule that called one-phase release and one-phase collection. They kept a vault with 22 phones in Ziploc bags and a Polaroid camera with the dated picture of a face I had seen in the cave. News traveled the way it does now. First wrong, then messy, then heavy. People said it couldn't be true. People said it had always been obvious. A hardware clerk told a reporter he'd wondered why so many fancy trucks came in on Thursdays without plates. A woman at the diner cried when she realized the tips she'd counted had sometimes come from men who thought they had bought the right to turn a person into quarry. The arrests came like hail. Alden in cuffs on the Great Stone Steps, 4 guides with their vests off, a bookkeeper who had never set foot in the timber, 17 in all. The charges sounded like the titles of sections in a manual for awfulness, kidnapping, trafficking across state lines, murder, conspiracy, obstruction. Photos of people who had been missing for years began to match names from the files. Not all of them. Not nearly. I sat in a witness room for hours across months. I told the same story the same way because doing it any other way would have felt like breaking something twice. The young woman from the cave testified too. Later, after she had a place to sleep that no one could find and a counselor who didn't speak in whispers. She had made it as far as she had by being stubborn and lucky and fast. None of that should be necessary to live. The clubhouse still stands. No one in Sage Hollow wants it torn down. They say letting it rot where it can be seen is better than letting it disappear into stories. Wind has peeled varnish off the door. A broken window rattles in December storms. Teenagers dare each other to sneak up the drive and take a picture of the chimney with the moon behind it. The town's feed store keeps the lights on later now in hunting season. People notice trucks that don't belong. I don't hunt anymore. I still love the quiet before dawn and the way frost paints grass into something fragile and brave. I still walk ridges. I still glass the far hillside and name everything I see. But a rifle feels different in my hands now. It's not guilt, so much as the knowledge that good tools bend under bad ideas if the hands are sure enough. When folks ask me if there were signs anyone could have seen, I tell them the truth that isn't satisfying. Men who want to hide will hide in plain sight if you let them put on the right costume. They will say tradition and heritage, until you forget to ask why they need radios that can talk to helicopters. They will praise ethics and hand you a thermos and put a hand on your shoulder on the steps of a beautiful lodge. They will smile. If you get an envelope someday that flatters you, be wary of how good it feels. If someone you respect says today's hunt is different, and that's the point. Ask what exactly is different. If you find a camp where a toothbrush is the newest thing and the firewood is stacked wrong, stop being polite. Pick a voice you trust, inside you or on the ridge, and listen to it over every other sound. I moved to Birchfield, Wisconsin, in late spring of 2024, when the maples were leafing out and the town's wooden porches smelled like rain. My husband's promotion had put us here from Milwaukee, and I arrived with a box of cookbooks, a trunk of winter coats, and the itch to be useful. Birchfield had 3,800 people on a sign that someone kept repainting after every census, a brick main street with painted cornices, and a habit of waving even when you weren't sure who was in the car. It looked like a postcard a decade late to the mailbox. By the second week, a letter arrived with a handwritten flourish on heavy stationery. Birchfield Helpworks, it said, a nonprofit that ran the food pantry, kept a small emergency fund for utilities and rent, and ran after-school tutoring in the Methodist basement. The letter was signed by the executive director, a woman named Laurel Danvers, who had founded the place in the early 1990s. "We'd be lucky to have you," she wrote, somehow already knowing my background in teaching. The invitation felt like someone had set a chair for me at a table already laid out. The warehouse they used sat on the edge of town between the feed mill and the bike trail. Inside, it smelled like coffee, cardboard, and bleach. Pallets of canned beans, racks of winter coats sorted by size, a small office with 2 desks and a squeaky chair. Volunteers moved with that productive quiet you only get when everybody believes in the work. Laurel greeted me with a quick hug. Late 50s, tall, neat haircut, a voice you'd follow out of a burning building. She told me she started Helpworks because small towns like ours were always an hour away from whatever families needed. "We're the bridge," she said. "We don't ask for papers, we don't shame. We don't make people tell their worst story twice." I signed forms and got a blue lanyard with my name written carefully in block letters. They started me on intake, hearing people out, figuring what could be done right now, who needed a second call tomorrow. I was 33 and thought I knew how to listen. I learned quickly I didn't know how to keep my face still when someone told me they'd been heating the kitchen with the oven. Birchfield looked tidy from the street, but within weeks I learned its hidden math. 2 jobs and still short at the end of the month. A broken timing belt that finally tipped everything. Grandparents suddenly raising teenagers and pretending they had the energy. Kids were everywhere in our files. Sleepy at tutoring, shy at the pantry door, quick to smile when a volunteer remembered their dog's name. Laurel spent extra time with them. She had a way of kneeling to their height without seeming to pose. When she told them they mattered, they believed her. She shared a little about her childhood sometimes. Foster homes, a house where no one woke her for school. The long wish to be seen. It came out in small, unvarnished bits that made people lean toward her. Donors adored her. Volunteers swore by her. If you measured a leader by how many people would show up on a Wednesday night because she asked, Laurel was exactly that. At first, I couldn't see the pattern. We were busy. A box of produce went out every 10 minutes. The phone never stopped. I only noticed because I kept a notebook with street names and follow-ups. Some families seemed to get everything. Food, a gas card, a spot in tutoring, a whisper about an emergency fund that might stretch to cover half a rent payment. Others came once, left with a bag, and didn't return, even when they clearly needed more. When I asked, I got reasonable answers. Limited resources. You help where help will take. It sounded right. Until I started matching names to outcomes. The kids who got the extra. Longer tutoring. Weekend backpacks with better snacks. Scholarship passes to summer camp. Were the ones who were the easiest to be around. Bright smiles, steady eye contact, old souls. The kids who flinched when you raised your voice, who took a while to answer, who grabbed 2 muffins because they didn't know when breakfast would happen again. Those kids got less. They'd be invited, but their invitation arrived late. Or the bus didn't make it to their side of town. Or the slots were full. I asked Laurel once about a boy I liked. A little guy who wore his sister's glitter backpack without shame and read about trains like it was a religion. "Is he on the list for camp?" I said. She gave me that tired smile leaders use when they're about to teach you something. "We only have 20 seats. We prioritize kids who can fully engage. It's about impact, Naya." I took the answer and told myself we'd do better next time. But it felt like a pebble in my shoe. It only got worse once I started filing intake notes into the long metal drawers that held Helpworks history. Each family had a folder with addresses, phone numbers, and copies of bills. That's normal. but some folders were thick with things that weren't. Personal observations about a parent's mood. Descriptions of kids, pleasant, attractive, well-mannered, withdrawn, written in tidy pen. A color dot on the tab that meant something I didn't understand. There were also program files that didn't match any grant I'd heard Laurel mention at Rotary lunches. These were the overnights. A weekend at a camp an hour away that wasn't on our brochure. A sleepover at Laurel's cabin by the lake for girls who need a break. A leadership retreat in a donated lodge out past the cranberry bogs. The permission slips were vague. Parents signed because they were desperate to give their kids something nice. There were pictures, too. Kids smiling by a dock, by a campfire. Nothing you could point to and say this is wrong. But the lists next to them made my stomach feel hollow. Rose, resilient, compliant, big eyes. Eli, eager to please. Tamsin, maternal with younger kids. It read like a catalog. I told myself I was overthinking. I went to Laurel with a softer question. Can we explain these programs better to parents? A calendar? A handout? She was all kindness and frost. Not every program is for every family. Donors expect discretion. Trust the process. In my teacher training, I learned how to see grooming for what it is, how attention can be a net, and gifts can be bait, and adults can teach a child to keep secrets in the name of special. Once you've seen that framework, it's a dark window you can't choose not to look through. The more I looked, the more nothing lined up. A woman named Alina came back one afternoon and asked to speak to me, instead of the usual case manager. We sat in the small side office with the plant that was always one watering away from collapse. Her hands shook as she talked. A few summers ago, her daughter had been invited to a lake weekend. When she got home, she stopped sleeping. She flinched at doorways. She would not say why. Alina had asked Laurel for details. Who was there, what they did, why her daughter had come back with a bruise on her shoulder blade the size of a hand. Laurel had been sorry. Had said she couldn't share specifics because donor privacy mattered. Had suggested therapy, and perhaps a pause from some programs until trust could be rebuilt. Alina's voice kept catching. I thought it was my fault. That I was being ungrateful. If I said anything, we wouldn't get food. I asked her if there were others. She nodded. Quietly, in the grocery store aisle, in the school parking lot, late at night, in back-channel Facebook messages. A handful of families who knew exactly how quickly a reputation could be ruined in a small town, and who needed the pantry, so they stayed careful. Kids who went on trips and came back different. I told myself I needed to be sure before I blew holes in the only safety net we had, so I did the thing I'm good at. I watched. I asked questions that sounded harmless. I made copies of forms that shouldn't have existed, and slid them into a folder with a center crease so I could tell if anyone had opened it. I tracked which kids were invited where, who drove them, which staff stayed late after tutoring to tidy up with one child at a time. I tried the police first because that's how it's supposed to work. The chief, a man named Dwyer with a belly earned honestly and a wall of plaques, smiled sadly through my careful sentences. He'd been honored by HelpWorks 3 times for community partnership. He'd volunteered at their Thanksgiving turkey drive. He said I sounded very concerned and offered to pass along my worries to Laurel so we could align. After that, the world bent. My password for the intake database stopped working. A volunteer shadowed me with the cheerful helpfulness of someone taking inventory. Laurel called me into her office and gave me a talk about boundaries. Not unkind, not loud. Just a reminder that overreach hurts families. I nodded, I smiled. I went home and made 3 copies of the worst things I had and put them in 3 different envelopes. The file that undid me was labeled with a grant code and the name. Sable. It was a spreadsheet of candidate attributes on age, appearance, compliance level, family stability, report risk. It read exactly like it sounds. Attached to it, internal emails where Laurel used a kind of sterile language I had never heard from her in public. Asset, placement suitability, guardian resistance. There was also a set of forms for mandated reports to Child Protective Services drafted on HelpWorks letterhead, alleging neglect or drug use in homes that had one thing in common: parents who had pushed back on undisclosed trips or who had asked too many questions after their kids came home shaken and quiet. Those reports had led to investigations. Some had led to removals. The foster families in 3 of those cases were linked to HelpWorks board members by the second page of a Google search. I sat at my kitchen table with my heart making a noise like a kettle about to blow, and wrote an email to a federal tip line I had to look up twice because my hands wouldn't stop bouncing on the keys. Then I drove to a Walgreens an hour away and mailed a fat registered packet to an address I found on a U.S. attorney's website. I also called a friend I trusted in Milwaukee and asked for a quiet introduction to someone who wouldn't hang up. It took longer than I wanted and less time than I feared. An agent called from a blocked number and asked me to meet at a public library 2 towns over. She wore a sweater the color of oatmeal and looked like a person who could hold bad stories without breaking. I handed her copies and dates and names. "Don't confront them," she said. "Don't ask for more. Don't change what you do. We need you where you are, seeing what you see." The days stretched. Laurel grew warmer and cooler in public, like someone testing thermostats. A mother I knew packed up at midnight and left Birchfield without telling anyone. A board member posted a photo of kids roasting marshmallows on a private beach with a caption about gratitude. And then, on an ordinary Thursday in November, 2 unmarked SUVs pulled up outside the warehouse at 10 in the morning, and 4 people in jackets with letters that took my breath away walked in. They were polite. They were relentless. They thanked us for our work. They handed over a warrant. They opened drawers. They copied hard drives. They wheeled out bank boxes and computers and the small camera from Laurel's office shelf. The town watched from the sidewalk as if a storm had rolled down Main Street and stopped at our door. Laurel stood very straight by the reception desk and said, to no one in particular, "We will cooperate." She was still saying it when an agent gently took her elbow and asked her to please step this way. By evening, my phone was a wild animal. Texts from volunteers, calls from parents who were afraid, and parents who were furious, and parents who were both. The next day, the paper used the word investigation 3 times before the fold. It took a week before anyone used the words arrest and charges. The list was long and bloodless on paper. Trafficking, exploitation, conspiracy, fraud. Then came the number that made people go quiet. At least 60 children harmed across 15 years. The money piece hurt too. Grants padded, reports fabricated, outcomes massaged into numbers that bought applause. Some of the kids were grown now. Some sat in chairs under soft lights and tried to talk with cameras off. Some would never be able to do either. The stories were old and new at once. A sleepover where doors locked from the outside. A shower while someone waited with a stopwatch. A secret that no one would understand. A foster placement that became a trap. Names were redacted. Enough detail bled through to stain everything. People asked me afterward why no one noticed. I don't know how to answer except to say that almost everyone did notice something and called it the wrong name. They called it excellence. They called it a can-do spirit. They called it the price of doing big work with too little staff. Good people brought casseroles to the warehouse and never once looked in a drawer. I don't say that like I'm better. I worked there, I smiled. I said we when I meant Laurel. I put my hand on a child's shoulder to comfort her and didn't see she winced. The building sits dark now. Windows boarded. A banner with our old mission statement flapping in the wind like a joke told at the worst time. Birchfield needed what HelpWorks pretended to be, and we still do. The food pantry moved to the VFW for a while, then to a church basement. The town spent a year arguing about whether to trust any nonprofit again. We learned to read grant reports like crime novels. We learned to ask the right question twice. I teach again part-time. In a classroom in the same Methodist basement where we used to tutor. And I still keep the blue lanyard in a drawer to remind myself that badges mean nothing by themselves. When a kid lingers after class, I wave another adult over before I take a step closer. When someone offers to take a child to a special event, I ask for the itinerary like I'm ordering a background check. When a leader tells a beautiful story about their own pain and how it taught them to save the world, I clap because I'm human, and then I look at their processes because I've learned. Sometimes I walk past the warehouse and stand across the street without meaning to. The wind blows through a loose soffit board and makes a hollow clapping sound, like the end of a meeting. If someone asks what I learned, I give a simple answer so they'll remember it. trust is not the feeling in your chest when someone says the right words. Trust is a policy in a binder that anyone can read. It's a door with a window and a second adult with a key. It's a list of trips with times and places and chaperones you can call. It's a parent who never has to beg to know where their child slept. Birchfield will be all right. We're small and stubborn. We plant tomatoes against fences that will never be tall enough for deer. We rebuild things we shouldn't have had to rebuild. The children, our children, are still here, louder now, and that is good. Some mornings a girl I recognize from the worst folder runs past my porch on her way to the bus. She looks back once to check for cars, quick and sure, and then keeps going. I don't wave. I don't want her to feel watched. I just stand there and let the ordinary morning hold her like it's supposed to. I never thought I'd spend weekends chasing the dead, but that's what happened after my grandmother left me her shoeboxes. Inside were brittle photographs, baptism cards, clippings folded to the size of postage stamps, and a ledger written in a looping hand I couldn't quite read unless I tilted it to the light. I scanned everything, built a tree, and watched a forest grow on my laptop. Names branching into names, dates into places I'd never been. One branch led again and again to a town I'd only heard in family stories. A place my great-great-grandfather supposedly reached with a single suitcase and a prayer. Ashdown. Virginia Ashdown lies where the Blue Ridge loosens its grip, and the hills turn soft. The highway drops you into a main street that looks poured from a mold. Brick storefronts with faded gold lettering, a diner that still sells pie by the slice, the creak of an old sign in the afternoon wind. Beyond town, hardwoods close in, oaks and chestnuts climbing ridgelines like a dark green tide. It felt older than any map could show, felt watched. The first door I opened belonged to the Ashdown History Guild, a grand name for a restored Queen Anne house with a wraparound porch and perfectly trimmed hedges. A brass plaque by the door listed the year 1961 and the founding families who had preserved the record for posterity. The woman who met me at the threshold moved like she owned the air in the room. "I'm Isolde Rain," she said, offering a hand cool as a faucet. Her hair was white as paper and set with care. Her voice the kind people stepped out of the way for without realizing they were doing it. "I'm trying to trace the Nyers," I said. "My great-great-grandfather was said to have settled here." She smiled like we'd shared a secret. "Then you've come to the right place, Mr. Nye." The guild's archive filled 3 rooms. Acid-free boxes labeled in neat block letters, map cases with handles that slid like silk, shelves of ledgers bound in leather, the color of dry leaves. I signed a visitor log and a confidentiality form that looked more like a mortgage. Isolde led me to a long table beneath a ceiling fan that ticked like a metronome. "We keep family files in the second room," she said. "You'll find the Nyers under N24. Take your time. I have done research in county offices where dust rises in a visible wave every time a clerk pulls a drawer. This wasn't that. Records were clean, complete, and too thorough. Births and deaths, yes, but also notes about hair color, left-handedness, a temperament described as sturdy or pliant, a talent for sums, a tendency toward melancholy. Multiple generations were logged like strains of wheat. There were charts, too. Big pages folded into quarters. Then again, lines connecting names that didn't always match the straight branches of a tree. Affinity maps, a typed header read. The lines linked marriages, but also business partnerships, hunting clubs, church committees, boarding arrangements, a boarding house taken up by one family after a death in another. At first I thought it was the kind of social history graduate students dream about. Then I noticed the notations trailing the lines. Avoid favorable, undesirable pairing. See Haver's report. Who writes undesirable pairing next to the wedding of 2 human beings? I took mental snapshots and scribbled in a notebook I'd meant for grocery lists. When I asked Isolde how the guild had built records so detailed, she said Ashdown's history was Ashdown's wealth. "We are our stories," she said, as if repeating a motto. "We keep them safe. We keep ourselves safe." In the afternoon, I requested the earliest Nyer file, expecting the usual: a ship manifest, a land deed. What I got instead was a folder with a photograph of a young man standing in front of a clapboard house with his hat in his hands, and a look that was either humility or caution. Tucked behind it, a letter dated 1897, on paper with a watermark of 2 crossed keys. "We are pleased to welcome Mr. Rowan Nair to our valley," it read. "Placement suitable. Contributes robust stock." Underneath, a note in different ink. "Monitor for intemperance. Match with Hargreave line within 2 years." The language pressed on my chest. Placement. Stock. Match. I turned the page and found 2 more letters, each weighing the traits of my ancestors as if they were breeding hounds. A century slid closer in a blink, and the words didn't change much. A 1958 letter debated whether a girl in my line, graceful, mild, good health, should be steered towards scholastic advancement or a marriage that would solidify the Merrill line. 1983 memorandum stamped internal. Remarked on a boy's mathematical facility and stable effect, then proposed that external opportunities be cultivated. I wanted to believe I was misunderstanding, that I'd wandered into a pile of old eugenic fantasies no one had acted on. That hope lasted until I found a bound volume labeled Connections, Recommendations, 1949 to 1971. The language was frank and terrible. Pairings approved and declined, with reasons amounting to a blueprint for a human harvest. Some entries had a second column, Outcome, where relocated appeared far too often beside a couple's names. The dates lined up with the years my grandmother had told me 2 of her cousins went north and stopped writing. I took a walk to clear my head. The town seemed to exhale in the evening. The grocery door chimed. Cicadas took up their chorus, someone's dog barked twice and then thought better of it. On the hill above the guild, a brick building wore a Latin motto over its lintel. A passerby told me it had been a school once, then a clinic. "Closed now," he said. "They say the guild's got the records." The next morning I arrived with a smile and a list. "Do you have the board minutes for 1963? I asked. "Any materials about the clinic?" Isolde's smile didn't change, but something in the room did. The way air feels before a summer storm. "Some years weren't kept," she said. "Flood damage. I had read about floods that take basements and memories both. Still, the guild seemed immune to ordinary ruin. I asked to see property transfers for 3 families marked relocated in my notes. The clerk, a woman younger than me with a pen tucked into her bun, brought ledgers promptly. Prices were low. Buyers clustered around familiar names, directors, their cousins, their business partners. A farm went for a sum that would have cost less than the tractor in its shed. 2 storefronts changed hands the same week their owners were marked departed. That afternoon I drove to the county seat and pulled records the guild couldn't control. Marriage licenses showed a pattern that felt like a hand on the back of your neck. Pairs made, pairs blocked. In one case, a couple applied 3 times in 1 year, were denied each time for incomplete documentation, then were married in a county 5 hours away and never returned. Hospital records were sparse, but coroner notes told their own small, bald story. Drownings in shallow water, falls from short ladders, pneumonia in the wrong season. Names I'd seen in the guild's files appeared on those lines with awful frequency. It was a waitress at the diner who finally said what I hadn't let myself say. "They pick who stays," she muttered while refilling my coffee, so softly she could have been talking to herself. "Been doing it since my granddad was a boy." She stared at my notepad, then turned and walked away. Back in the archive, I stopped asking for what I wanted and started asking for what they wanted me to want. The Merrill business ledgers? I'd say, and accept a box that put me within reach of the Hargreave box I really needed. That's how I found the file labeled External Arrangements. I wish I could tell you it surprised me. Letters described placements for promising youth at a partner academy in another state. Stipends flowed from accounts that didn't belong to any local fund I'd heard of. Names were checked off next to dates and destinations in words that made my stomach turn. Delivery confirmed. Worse sat behind that. A list that was not a list so much as a ledger of inventory. Height, hair and eye color, blood type. Cognitive assessment, superior. Endurance, excellent. Reproductive, health verified. The handwriting curved like a music. Teachers, it might have been Beautiful if the words hadn't been what they were. An index card paper clipped to the top bore a note in a different hand. For catalog, do not circulate. I had been careful until then. After that, I stopped pretending careful would save me. I took photographs with my phone held low and still. I sent files to an email address a journalist friend had set up for sources who needed to remain shadows. I scanned until my fingers shook. Then I slid every page exactly as I'd found it. Every box returned to its exact square on the shelf. On Friday, 2 men stood by the guild's porch steps when I arrived. They were dressed like lawyers who liked the woods. Good boots, jackets bought in the sort of store where the clerk uses your first name. "Mr. Nye," one said, smiling as if we were neighbors. "We've noticed your enthusiasm. We do like enthusiastic researchers. May we ask what you hope to find?" "A birth record," I said. "Of course," he said. "We're a small community. We look after our own. It can be confusing when people from away misread things." Inside, Isolde was already at the table, a folder waiting like a stage prop. "We've prepared a little gift," she said. "The Nair tree as complete as we can make it. You can take it home." She opened it to a page I hadn't seen. At the top was my name, written in a neat hand I now recognized everywhere. Beneath it, in red pencil, "Favorable." Beside it, a date and 2 initials I'd come to dread. Something unclenched in me. The feeling wasn't bravery. It was that strange clarity people describe before an accident. "I'd like to see the clinic records," I said. I don't know why I said it aloud, only that I did. The men by the door stepped closer without stepping. Isolde watched my face the way a hawk watches pasture. "Those are restricted," she said. "For your own protection, Mr. Nye. You tracked marriages," I said. "You pushed families out. And when that didn't work, you made people disappear. You wrote about my great-great-grandfather like he was a stud horse." She didn't flinch. "We safeguarded a community through hard times," she said calmly. "We kept it healthy. We made alliances. We directed talent where it could flourish. It's the work of any serious society. And the young people you sent away?" I asked. "The ones whose deliveries you confirmed?" Her eyes flicked to the door before she looked back at me with a pity I will never forgive. "Mr. Nye," she said, "you have the temperament to appreciate a system. Let us help you understand it. Stay a while. We can show you where you fit. Your line is valuable." The man nearest me placed a hand on the back of the chair next to mine. It was a small thing. It said, "Sit or we'll help you sit." I smiled, stood, thanked them for their time, and walked out into the light with my heart doing something reckless in my ribs. I didn't drive straight out of town. I drove to the courthouse first and pulled what I could on a speed that had the clerk blinking. Death certificates, deeds, marriage denials. I took pictures until my phone screamed low battery, then paid cash at a gas station for a charger and a map, and the kind of coffee that peels paint. I stopped at the diner and left too big a tip and a folded note with a number written on it for the waitress who had risked more than she knew. Then I headed east, because east was where the interstate was. And the interstate was where places you can disappear in on purpose live. At a rest area, with trees trimmed into cubes and a fountain that didn't work. I sent everything I had to people who answer unlisted phones. A week later, 2 agents met me in a library parking lot 3 counties away. They asked careful questions, then more careful questions, then the same questions again to see if the shape of my story stayed the same. It did, because the shape had been given to me by the guild itself, in a script they'd been rehearsing for 60 years. When it broke fast for a thing that old. Warrants in unmarked envelopes, vans that looked like plumbing trucks, boxes carried down steps like the guild was moving house. Isolde Rain was led out with her hair still perfect and her mouth set. The men with the good boots went quiet in a way that makes a room feel colder. News stories broke in drips, then in a rush. Trafficking, kidnapping, conspiracy, falsified records, unlawful removals. Numbers turned from rumors into counts. More than 100 people gone over 5 decades. Some tucked into institutions that no one ever checked, some married into nothing, some delivered to clients whose names never made it to the paper, but live in sealed indictments now. Families unspooled themselves from Ashdown like threads pulled from a sweater. Those who stayed spoke in low voices outside the grocery store, and pretended the wind had always sounded like that on Main Street. The brick building on the hill was sealed. The motto over the door gathered dust. The guild house, once open by appointment every afternoon, went dark. For a long time no one mowed the lawn. I didn't go back. I sat in a courtroom with a dry mouth and answered questions no one should have to ask about their own blood. I learned things I haven't told anyone. Not because I want to keep secrets, but because putting certain knowledge into the air seems like a way of giving it a second life. At night after testimony, I lay in a rented room and stared at the plaster and understood something simple and sharp. I had not been born free. I had been granted, approved, stamped by people who thought that made them gods. There is no good way to find that out. There is only the fact of it and what you do after. I still build trees. I still label photographs and scan brittle baptism cards before they crumble. I still like the moment when a name finds its place and the past clicks into a shape. But I don't pretend anymore that a pedigree is a promise. Lineage is not virtue. A ledger is not love. The only record that matters is the one we keep by how we treat each other, in the present tense. Sometimes I think about the charts in the guild with their neat lines and tidy endings. Then I think about the waitress who poured coffee for a stranger and whispered a truth anyway. I think about the cousins my grandmother said went north, and about the young faces catalogued like livestock that somebody somewhere has to remember by their laughter and not their height. If I have a mission now, it's boring and righteous. Ask for open records. Demand a second set of eyes. Insist that even the prettiest building in town be audited down to the nails. Ashdown still exists on maps. The guild house stands behind a chain-link fence with a padlock that looks too small to have held back so much. When I pass down that way on my way to somewhere else, I don't turn in. I drive slow on Main Street and count the lights and watch a kid on a bike pull a wheelie and nearly fall, and laugh at himself. I tell myself that's the line I care to follow now. Not who begat whom, but who is let to be.